nations, including our Arab partners. Together, we welcome 3 new countries to our coalition: Nigeria, Tunisia, and Malaysia. Nearly 24 nations are in some way contributing to the military campaign, and we salute and are grateful for all the service members from our respective nations who are performing with skill and determination. In Iraq, ISIL continues to hold Mosul, Fallujah, and Ramadi. But Iraqi forces, backed by coalition air power, have liberated towns across Kirkuk province and Tikrit. ISIL has now lost nearly a third of the populated areas in Iraq that it had controlled. 18 countries are now helping to train and support Iraqi forces, including Sunni volunteers who want to push ISIL out of their communities. And Prime Minister Abadi, I want to note the enormous sacrifices being made by Iraqi forces and the Iraqi people in this fight every day. In Syria, which has obviously been a topic of significant discussion during the course of this General Assembly, we have seen support from Turkey that has allowed us to intensify our air campaign there. ISIL has been pushed back from large sections of northeastern Syria, including the key city of Tal Abyad, putting new pressure on its stronghold of Raqqa. And ISIL has been cut off from almost the entire region bordering Turkey, which is a critical step towards stemming the flow of foreign terrorist fighters. Following the Special Security Council meeting I chaired last year, more than 20 additional countries have passed or strengthened laws to disrupt the flow of foreign terrorist fighters. We share more information, and we are strengthening border controls. We've prevented would-be fighters from reaching the battlefield and returning to threaten our countries. But this remains a very difficult challenge, and today we're going to focus on how we can do more together. In conjunction with this summit, the United States and our partners are also taking new steps to crack down on the illicit finance that ISIL uses to pay its fighters, fund its operations, and launch attacks. Our military and intelligence efforts are not going to succeed alone. They have to be matched by political and economic progress to address the conditions that ISIL has exploited in order to take root. Prime Minister Abadi is taking important steps to build a more inclusive and accountable government while working to stabilize areas taken back from ISIL, and our nations need to help Prime Minister Abadi in these efforts. In Syria, as I said yesterday, defeating ISIL requires, I believe, a new leader and an inclusive government that unites the Syrian people in the fight against terrorist groups. This is going to be a complex process, and as I've said before, we are prepared to work with all countries, including Russia and Iran, to find a political mechanism in which it is possible to begin a transition process. As ISIL's tentacles reach into other regions, the United States is increasing our counterterrorism cooperation with partners like Tunisia. We're boosting our support to Nigeria and its neighbors as they push back against Boko Haram, which has pledged allegiance to ISIL. And we're creating a new clearinghouse to better coordinate the world's support for countries' counterterrorism programs so that our efforts are as effective as possible. Ultimately, however, it is not going to be enough to defeat ISIL in the battlefield. We have to prevent it from radicalizing, recruiting, and inspiring others to violence in the first place. And this means defeating their ideology. Ideologies are not defeated with guns, they're defeated by better ideas, a more attractive and compelling vision. Building on our White House summit earlier this year and summits around the world since then, we're moving ahead together in several areas. We're stepping up our efforts to discredit ISIL's propaganda, especially online. The UAE's new messaging hub, the Sawab Center, is exposing ISIL for what it is, which is a band of terrorists that kills innocent Muslim men, women, and children. We're working to lift up the voices of Muslim scholars, clerics, and others, including ISIL defectors, who courageously stand up to ISIL and its warped interpretations of Islam. We recognize that we have to confront the economic grievances that exist in some of the areas that ISIL seeks to exploit. Poverty does not cause terrorism, but as we've seen across the Middle East and North Africa, when people, especially young people, are impoverished and hopeless and feel humiliated by injustice and corruption, that can fuel resentments that terrorists exploit, which is why sustainable development, creating opportunity and dignity, particularly for youth, is part of countering violent extremism. We recognize we also have to address the political grievances that ISIL exploits. I've said this before, when human rights are denied and citizens have no opportunity to redress their grievances peacefully, it feeds terrorist propaganda that justifies violence. Likewise, when political opponents are treated like terrorists and thrown in jail, it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the real path to lasting stability and progress is not less democracy. I believe it is more democracy in terms of free speech and freedom of religion, rule of law, strong civil societies. All that has to play a part in countering violent extremism. And finally, we recognize that our best partners in protecting vulnerable people from succumbing to violent extremist ideologies are the communities themselves. Families, friends, neighbors, clerics, faith leaders who love and care for these young people. Remember that violent extremism is not unique to any one faith, so no one should be profiled or targeted simply because of their faith. Yet, we have to recognize that ISIL is targeting Muslim communities around the world, especially individuals who may be disillusioned or confused or wrestling with their identities. And in all of our countries, we have to continue to build true partnerships with Muslim communities based on trust and cooperation so that they can help protect their loved ones from becoming radicalized. And this cannot just be the work of government. It is up to all of us. We have to commit ourselves to build diverse, tolerant, inclusive societies that reject anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant bigotry that creates the divisions, the fear, and the resentments upon which extremists can prey. I'm pleased that here at this summit, businesses, including high-tech companies, are investing funds, training, and technological expertise to support innovative programs that push back on violent extremism. Cities around the world are joining together to build more resilient communities. Researchers are partnering to share best practices, knowing what works and what we can do better. And as we saw yesterday, young people from around the world are participating in their own summit. And these young people, many of them Muslim, are coming together and using their talents and technology to push back on ISIL's propaganda, especially online, and to protect their brothers and sisters from recruitment. These young people are an inspiration and give us hope. And I'd ask everyone to join me in thanking all the young people who are here today. So, to conclude, we face a grave challenge. We have to be clear-eyed about the fact that this is very hard work. We have individuals here like Prime Minister Abadi and President Buhari who are on the front lines. This is not going to be turned around overnight because it is not just a military campaign that we are involved in. There are profound changes taking place in the Middle East and North Africa. There are problems that have built up over decades that are expressing themselves and manifesting themselves in organizations like ISIL. Even if we were to wipe out the entire cadre of ISIL leadership, we would still have some of these forces at work. But ultimately, I am optimistic. In Iraq and in Syria, ISIL is surrounded by communities, countries, and a broad international coalition committed to its destruction. We've seen that ISIL can be defeated on the battlefield, where there is sound organization and a government and military that is coordinating with this coalition and with our diplomatic efforts. And here at this summit, we're seeing a new global movement to counter the violent extremism that ISIL needs to survive. like terrorists and tyrants throughout history, ISIL will eventually lose because it has nothing to offer but suffering and death. And when you look at the reports of those who are laboring under their control, it is a stark and brutal life that does not appeal to people over the long term. So we will ultimately prevail because we are guided by a stronger, better vision, a commitment to the security, opportunity, and dignity of every human being. But it will require diligence, focus, and sustained effort by all of us. And I am grateful that all of you who are already participating are committed to this work. With that, I want to give the floor to our Secretary General, His Excellency, Mr. Ban Ki-moon.
Thank you, Your Excellency President Obama, for your strong leadership and very inspiring and visionary statement today. And I'd like to also thank you for hosting this very important Leaders Summit this morning after a very successful and meaningful White House Summit meeting on countering violent extremism in February in Washington, D.C. Since then, this process has sparked serious conversations around the world to address the menace at its roots. Violent extremist groups, including Daesh and Boko Haram, pose a direct threat to international security, mercilessly target women and girls, and undermine universal values of peace, justice, and human dignity. That threat is growing. Our most recent data shows a 70% of increase in foreign terrorist fighters from over 100 countries to regions in conflict. Addressing this challenge goes to the heart of the mission of the United Nations, and it requires a unified response. We know violent extremism flourishes when human rights are violated, aspirations for inclusion are ignored, and too many people, especially the world's young people, with their hopes and dreams, lack prospect and meaning in their lives. We also know the crucial ingredients for success: good governance, the rule of law, open pluralist societies, quality education, and decent jobs, full respect for human rights. Security-focused counterterrorism measures are crucial. Yet we can no longer have such efforts backfire by playing into the hands of those we are seeking to defeat, or by further alienating already marginalized groups or communities. The United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy, the Security Council Resolution 2178, provides tools for addressing the scourge of violent extremism, including the growing flow of thousands of foreign terrorist fighters. The newly adopted Sustainable Development Goals also echo the voices of people and critically include a goal of peace, justice, and strong institutions. Our objective must be to go beyond the countering violent extremism to preventing it in the first place. On the basis of an emerging international consensus, I intend to present a comprehensive plan of action to prevent violent extremism early next year to the General Assembly. I hope that each and every member state who are participating in this would closely coordinate to share your experience and your vision, how we can work together to combat and fight this extremism. And we most welcome your suggestions. This plan, which is firmly based on the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy, will provide specific recommendations to member states on individual and collective actions to systematically address the drivers of violent extremism at every level. It will also put forward recommendations on how the UN system can support member states to prevent violent extremism through an all-of-UN approach covering the many dimensions of our work. Let me briefly highlight 5 keys to success. First, governments cannot do it alone. We need to engage all of society, religious leaders, women leaders, leaders in the arts, music, and sports. Second, we need to make a special effort to reach young people where they live, share ideas, and communicate. Social media is central. We need to offer a counterweight to the siren songs that promise adventure but deliver horror, and that promise a meaning but create more misery. Third, leaders must work harder to build truly accountable institutions. I continue to urge leaders to listen very carefully to the grievances and aspirations of their people and address them. Fourth, and fundamentally, we must be guided by the moral compass of our common values. Respect for international law and human rights is non-negotiable. Without it, we are lost. Fifth, and finally, let us not be ruled by fear or provoked by those who strive to exploit it. We have a major challenge before us, one that will not disappear overnight, but one that we can address concretely by forging societies of inclusion, ensuring lives of dignity, and pursuing this essential endeavor inspired at all times by the United Nations Charter and Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I thank you, and thank you for your commitment. Thank you very much.
Next, I would like to give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Haider al-Abadi, Prime Minister of the Republic of Iraq.
السيد الرئيس أوباما، سيد بان كيمون الأمين العام للأمم المتحدة، السادة قادة العالم وشعوبهم، السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Peace may be upon you, and God, it has been over 1 year since ISIS controlled Iraq, and what it has caused of tragedies and atrocities for civilians and belongings. During this day, there has been a universal alliance, and there are a lot of friends of states who stood with us, and we're thankful to whoever stood with us against this unified enemy, which is not only a threat to us but for the whole world. Today, it has been 1 year since I have been over this government that was the product of free elections. This development that we have established last year, we need to get the profits from during this year and during this coming months, and we can do it by unifying our forces. In order to know our stance and our approach, we need first to remember where we have been during last year before forming this government, and what we inherited from a country that is living a crisis, in which crisis was occupying more than 30% of the region, and our military forces was in a very dangerous position, and there was the oldest culture in the world that was threatened by the occupation of ISIS, which is by occupying Iraq. There were in the internal front, there was a lot of sectarian wars, and the government was very weak at that point. We had crisis that was financial and bureaucracy, heavy bureaucracy in the country, and a lot of unemployed people. We have worked hard in order to reunify our country against and rebuilding our forces and regaining our connection with the world, and building also the tribal communities and their leaders, including Anbar, Salahuddin, and Musil, who are under threat of ISIS. A lot of the tribes' sons are fighting by the government military forces, and we are eradicating the roots of corruption in civil associations after we have recused a lot of officials in different governments, and we provided more than 80,000 personnel who are fighting Daesh with salaries, also for fighting ISIS, and we also have cancelled what is more than 50,000 of what is called the elusive soldiers who were just receiving salaries without really doing any work. This way we got our budget rid of the burden. We're also getting rid of honor posts and reducing Iraq's dependence on oil income. During this, we're trying to benefit from the reduction of the oil. We are trying to unify all the government and the community around it. And our government is seeking forming local fighters who are fighting together against terrorism, and because ISIS is threatening the whole area, we are working on reinforcing our connection or relationship, including Saudi Iran and Saudi Arabia, and all the regions of the area generally. We're also making reforms in the area and in the diplomatic front, and we are acquiring.
ودول صديقة قمنا بتحرير آمرلي وجرف الصخر وبيجي وجولاء والسعدية والضلوعية وتكريت والعلم والحجاج ومناطق أخرى كثيرة غيرها. وفي عملية تحرير تكريت قمنا بإشراك قوات الأمن العراقية والشرطة المحلية والشرطة الاتحادية والعشائر في تلك المنطقة والحج الشعبي ليقوموا بتحرير مواطنينا من طغيان الإرهابيين.
Community forces also, tens of thousands of Iraqi people are now back in Tikrit. About 80% who had they came back after a lot of assistance who provided aid to Iraqi directly or indirectly.
بالرغم من مخاوف الكثيرين بهذا الشأن فإن حالات الانتقامات كانت ضئيلة جدا بالمقارنة مع حوزة الحياة الطبيعية على نحو متزايد.
Retributions were low compared to the fears of them, where ISIS was committing different kinds of crimes against from tribes against the others. This way, there has been retribution and revenge cases, but it's been limited. That's why we consider it to be victory in all trees, but we still need the aid of the civil
ومع حقيقة سيطرة
international
الإرهابيين على مناطق
community.
كثيرة من بلدنا
Despite
وبالتزامن مع
the
هبوط أسعار النفط ونزوح ملايين
what's
العراقيين
going on
لحد الآن
of
لدينا
the
ما يزيد على 3 ملايين نازح
we have 3 million
وميزانية محدودة جدا في
Iraqi
ظل
who
أوقات
has
الحرب
been out of
بالمقارنة
their
مع ما
places,
أنفقته
and
الحكومات
with the
السابقة في
budget
وقت
of
السلم
Iraq
فلا يمكننا
compared to what
تمويل
have been, we
المعارك التي
cannot
يسعى
finance
جنودنا
all these
إلى تحقيقها وتحقيق النصر فيها بشكل لائق.
battles that we are
نحن
seeking
بحاجة إلى
to
مساعدتكم
win. We
ومساعدة
need your
المجتمع الدولي
help
في
and the
التمويل
help of the
وتجهيز
international
المعدات
community in
لجنودنا في
financing
ساحات
and the
الوغى
equipment of
كما
our
نحتاج دعمكم
soldiers. We
أيضا
need your
في أن نضمد
support in
جراحات
order
الشعب
to also
ونرعى أرامل وأيتام من فقدوا في المعركة وتوفير
take care
الخدمات
of
اللائقة بهم.
the people who lost
نحن
their loved
نحتاج
ones
إلى
and
مساعدتكم
the
في
children.
تجفيف
We need your help
منابع
to
الإرهابيين
also to
الفكر
dry
المتطرف الذي يأتي من
where
كل
the
مكان
radicals
وهؤلاء
and the terrorists are stemming
الإرهابيون
from,
الذين يأتون من
and their
مختلف دول
ideologies who are
العالم
coming from all
يأتون من أوروبا
places
يأتون من
in the
شمال
world,
أمريكا
and they're coming
ينبغي
from the North
ويأتون من دول
America.
عربية
They're
وإسلامية
coming from
كثيرة
Islamic and Arabic
وعلينا
countries
العمل مع
too.
دول
We need
الجوار
to
من أجل
work
إيقاف
with
تدفق
our
المقاتلين
neighboring
الأجانب
countries to
الإرهابيين
stop
الأجانب
the
الذين يقتلون المدنيين في العراق
terrorist
وفي
fighters who
سوريا
are killing
ويعودون
civilians
مرة
in
أخرى إلى
Iraq and Saudi
بلدانهم
Arabia, and then
من
go back to
المحتمل
their
أن يقوموا بأعمال
countries where they
إرهابية
come from
كثيرة.
after they have
نطلب
done
منكم
a lot
جميعا
of
أن تمنع الإرهابيين
terrorist
من تحويل الأموال
actions. We
عبر
want you to
الشبكات
stop the
المالية
terrorists from
الدولية.
financing the
هناك
money
شبكات
through
مالية دولية تستخدم
international
علناً
financial
لتمويل
networks that
الإرهابيين
are
لحد الآن.
being used now
نطالب
to
بإيقافها على
finance
ضوء
those terrorists. We are
القرارات الملزمة
demanding
لمجلس
to
الأمن التي
suspend
اتخذت في
it
العام الماضي
under the light
ومنعهم
of
من
the
الاستفادة من تهريب
resolution
النفط
of the
واستعباد النساء
council.
والأطفال
We want you to help
وسرقة
us
الآثار
stop them
والقطع
from
الفنية التي تذهب إلى تمويل أعمالهم
enslaving
الوحشية.
women and men
ولأن
and
الإرهاب
stealing the
يستقطب أولئك الذين
artifacts,
امتلأت قلوبهم بالكراهية.
and because those
ينبغي علينا
people
جميعا
who
أن نحارب
have
الفكر
been,
المتطرف
whose hearts have
الذي
been
تبناه
filled
أعداء
with
الديمقراطية
hatred,
في منطقتنا
we need to
بالتزامن مع
adopt
معالجة أسباب المشاكل الاجتماعية والاقتصادية التي من شأنها أن تشجع على التطرف. ونحن في العراق قد ابتدأنا بعلاج حقيقي على ضوء حزمات الإصلاح التي قمنا بها لحد الآن على استئصال هذا السبب الأساسي الذي يدعو البعض للتوجه نحو الإرهاب ونحو العنف. إن العراقيين قدموا آلاف التضحيات من المدنيين والمقاتلين والقادة وهم مستمرون في القتال والتضحيات من أجل تحرير وطننا وحماية حضارتنا من حماية العالم يجب أن لا نفقد التركيز ولا نهدر الوقت في حشد مواردنا لدحر داعش فنحن متمكنون من ذلك بعون الله. لا تنسوا أبدا أن عنصر التأثير يعد حليفا لداعش وأن العواقب الوخيمة لا تؤدي بحياة العراقيين فحسب بل بأن العالم معا قد أوقفتم وأوقفنا زحف الإرهابيين معا سنحرز نصرا مؤزرا لا يحسب لبلدي فحسب ولا يحسب للعراقيين فقط وإنما لكل دولة ممثلة ولكل شعوب الأرض التي ساهمت معنا في دحر الإرهاب. شكرا لكم جميعا لكل ما عملناه سويا وما سنعمله معا. شكرا.
Thank you, Prime Minister Abadi, for
شكرا
your statement
سيد عبادي
and for
على
the
تصريحكم
work you're doing under
أو
very challenging
العمل
circumstances.
الذي تزاولونه تحت
address this
ظروف
issue
تحديات
in
كبيرة
your country.
وفي بلدكم.
I want to next give the floor to His Excellency Mr.
التالي السيد
Buhari,
محمد بوخاري
the President of the
رئيس
Federal
الجمهورية
Republic of Nigeria.
الفدرالية في نيجيريا.
Mr. Chairman, Your
سيد
Excellencies,
الرئيس أصحاب
Ladies and
السيادة
gentlemen,
سيداتي
I thank President
سادتي
Obama for organizing this
شكرا
important
للرئيس
meeting.
أوباما على عقد هذا
The
الاجتماع
timing is
الهام.
appropriate and the subject matter warrants our close attention. The threats posed by ISIL in the Middle East and violent extremism elsewhere are an existential danger to many states. ISIL is a serious threat to international peace and security and should be treated as such. There can be no half measures of expedient solutions in dealing with terrorists and extremists. They respect no laws and have no regard to the sanctity of lives and property. They operate outside law and must be seen for what they are and dealt with appropriately. Given that the acceptance process for recruits into ranks of ISIL involves rigorous vetting and screening, as well as sponsorship known as tazkiyah, our expectation was that the demanding enlistment process, coupled with the legal framework instituted by the United Nations, would stem the tide of their flow. Apparently, this is not yet happening. Mr. Chairman, the increase in violence and terrorism by ISIL and other groups has enticed and emboldened insurgent groups in Africa to pledge allegiance to gain local traction. The Boko Haram terrorist group, operating in the Lake Chad Basin area, which is currently on the Al-Qaeda sanctions list, pledged its allegiance to ISIL in March 2015. While we believe that Boko Haram action is an indication of the weakening operational capacity of the group, it could also suggest that it was a strategic move to attract foreign fighters into its fold and obtain assistance from ISIL. Certainly, whatever the reason was for the declaration of allegiance, one thing is certain: Boko Haram terrorists group wants to be drawn into the center stage of global terrorism. This development has led not only to a shift in strategy, but also to changes in ideology, recruitment, and propaganda methods by Boko Haram. Its recourse to mass executions and public beheadings in the style of ISIL became notoriously widespread after the declaration of allegiance. We also note that sub-Saharan Africa has been receiving special attention for purposes of radicalization and incitement. In the April 2015 edition of the IS magazine, the book entitled "Sharia Alone Will Rule Africa," Boko Haram was congratulated for joining the caravan of jihad, saying that they would now guard yet another frontier of Khalifa. Boko Haram is neither protecting nor promoting Islam. Islam is the religion of peace and does not advocate the killing of innocent people. Furthermore, capitalizing on historic ethnic tensions and upheavals in Africa, ISIL is making vigorous recruitment campaigns and strident efforts to expand into some communities into the Sahel region. Indeed, ISIL operations have lent credence to the supposition that terrorism and violent extremism are the two sides of the same coin. Mr. Chairman, Nigeria notes with satisfaction the efforts of the United Nations and the rest of the international community to contain ISIL. We certainly need to do more. We need to take military action combined with effective border security, intelligence collection and sharing, and vigorous policing action. These alone may not suffice, but they can certainly stem the tide and reverse the process of recruitment, movement, and effective operation of foreign terrorist fighters and their associated radical extremists. In order to put in place the critical components of an effective approach to countering ISIL and eventually defeating it, we must address the threat from source. We must find a way to prevent young people from turning to terror in the first place. And the young people that turn to violent extremism do not exist in a vacuum. They are often part of communities and families and are lured into the fold of barbaric and nihilistic organizations somehow through a misguided appeal to their worst fears, expectations, and apparent frustrations. While addressing the causes of this attraction and how to deal with them, we should pay close attention to other manifest factors that may not be tangible but can be crucial. Good governance, which entails transparency, accountability, and rule of law, remains the basis on which we should kickstart the process of ridding the world of the menace of terrorism and violent extremism. The international community will be required to work together to deter and disrupt illicit financial flows from nations with weak anti-theft structures to other parts of the world. Where such funds are identified, the victim state should be assisted to recover them expeditiously. Mr. Chairman, you have yourself observed that, and I quote, groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIL exploit the anger that festers when people feel that injustice and corruption leave them with no chance of improving their lives, unquote. Mr. Chairman, member states need to address local socio-economic grievances by formulating policies that will ensure broad-based transformation through job creation, equalization of opportunities, and expanding access to social services. We in Africa need also rededicate ourselves to uphold the mandate of the African Union Peer Review Mechanism and other good governance initiatives that we have adopted in our region to encourage conformity with political, economic, and corporate governance values. Mr. Chairman, the Secretary General of the United Nations noted in 2015, we are facing, I quote, the greatest test our human family faces in the 21st century, unquote. Thus, all options must be explored and all hands must be on deck in the quest for a durable and a lasting penalty to the threat posed by ISIL, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and the like. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for that statement. And I now give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Erna Solberg, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Norway.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity to speak about violent extremism. It's one of the greatest security challenges of our time. Violent extremism brings death and suffering to innocent people. It brings destruction and insecurity to whole societies and regions, and it's on the rise worldwide. Our goal must be clear. Violent extremism must be defeated. We must work together to combat violent extremism and eradicate its roots, the conditions and attitudes that allow such forces to exist and grow. And each and every one of us can make a difference. We need to mobilize civil society, young people, women, faith leaders, local communities, and governments. We need a concerted effort to prevent and counter violent extremism. Last year, Norway launched our National Action Plan Against Radicalization. It involves local communities, civil society organizations, and 9 different government departments. The work against radicalization has to transcend silos. Poverty and lack of opportunities are often said to be the root causes of violent extremism. This is a grave oversimplification. It does not sufficiently explain the complex range of factors that motivate people to commit terrorist acts. We must, however, recognize that the risk of people being drawn to violent groups increases in areas where there are few other opportunities. This is particularly true for young people. But let me be very clear. There can be no excuses for violent extremist actions. Violent extremism is illegitimate and unacceptable. The perpetrators must always be held accountable. On the 22nd of July 2011, Norway experienced a terrorist attack on the main government building. Later that day, a youth camp at Utøya was brutally attacked. Many young women and men lost their lives. What we saw in the aftermath was an incredible engagement of commitment from our youth across all political dividing lines. We know that there are groups out there who are willing to cynically exploit vulnerable people, particularly young people. Young people must be involved in governance and development of our societies if we want them to prevent them being recruited to violent extremism. This was clearly expressed at the Youth Against Violent Extremism event at the European Conference of Countering Violent Extremism in Oslo in June. and it was highlighted once again in the Global Youth Summit in New York yesterday. An independent European youth network against violent extremism was launched in Oslo in June. We hope this will grow into a global network, and we hope that you will all find it as a useful partner in developing your own plans to stop violent extremism. Last year, the Security Council adopted Resolution 2178, which calls for the promotion of women's empowerment as part of the work to counter violent extremism. Extremists also understand the power of women, so they want them on their side. At the same time, they attack women's rights and silence women who are often an alternative vision of society. But it's exactly these voices that must be heard. Therefore, I warmly welcome and support the new alliance of women's organizations against the violent extremism. But I like to underline, when women raise their voices like this, they are not just heard by the extremists and hit by the extremists. They are often also attacked by more traditional forces in our societies. They will need our backing if they shall do their work against extremism. As new forms of violent extremism emerge, new knowledge is needed. We must improve our ability to share information that we already have, but we also need more research to shed new lights on the local drivers of extremism. It is at the local level that the drivers of violent extremism can be most easily understood. So local communities and authorities have a key role to play. The newly established Strong Cities Network will enable cities across the world to pool their resources, knowledge, and best practices. We must also strengthen international cooperation. Norway has launched a new development aid program to prevent and counter violent extremism. And we welcome the Secretary-General's initiative to draw up a new action plan to prevent violent extremism. This will complement Security Council Resolution 2178, which currently underpins international efforts to stem the flow of foreign terrorist fighters. Norway is contributing to all 5 lines of efforts set out by the Global Coalition to Counter ISIL. The Norwegian military contingent is now fully deployed in Iraq. We are helping to stem the flow of financial resources and foreign terrorist fighters, working to counter ISIL's propaganda and helping to stabilize areas in Iraq. We are also providing humanitarian assistance. So let me round off by quoting Ibrahim Abukar, a young Norwegian Somali man who spoke at the youth conference in Oslo. What happens in a small corner of the world will affect us, all of us. So let's start working together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for that excellent statement. We're now moving to a critical part of our agenda, and that is to hear from a broader group of coalition members in discussing how we can make further progress against ISIL. It's a large and growing global coalition. It stands united around a common mission. We're going to hear from key members of this coalition about the various efforts and the collective capabilities that we're bringing to bear, from military training and support to our partners on the ground in Iraq and Syria, to denying terrorist access to global financial systems and working to counter ISIL's message of hate. As we've indicated before, this is a long-term campaign and requires the kind of cooperation and effort from all of us that will be challenging, but I'm confident that we are up to the task. And I want to begin by giving the floor to His Majesty King Abdullah II, King of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Your Majesty.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, President Obama, for your continued leadership and commitment on this issue, which is possibly the greatest collective threat of our time. Last year, I spoke here of the need for a coalition of the determined, and indeed, this has transpired. Our collective resolve resulted in degrading Daesh assets and capabilities over the past year. Importantly, we have succeeded in interrupting Daesh's access to some of its vital financial resources. As a result of our efforts, Daesh's momentum has been weakened. However, our coalition still faces significant challenges, and as Mr. President, you said yesterday, if we cannot work together more effectively, we will all suffer the consequences. We all know the road ahead is long, but we can navigate it by continuing to work collectively, constantly adapting our strategy and upgrading coordination among coalition members. While this coalition is focused on fighting Daesh in Syria and Iraq, a more holistic approach requires a wider perspective and plan to eradicate the threat, as well as an inclusive political solution to these conflicts. We must tackle the flow of foreign fighters and Daesh's supply chain across borders more effectively. Empowering local communities in the fight against Daesh and conducting the war in a way that alleviates their suffering is also vital. As I said last year, this is first and foremost our struggle. Muslim nations have to lead this fight to protect and show the true nature of our religion. Again, and as you pointed out, Mr. President, while the battles may be fought on the ground and by the population that is most affected, this war can only be won on the ideological plane. Another challenge we still need to address more effectively is the battleground in cyberspace. We know Daesh is replenishing its ranks by targeting and luring potential members worldwide through social media, and it is still able to fund new recruits' travel to Syria and Iraq. Daesh, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, and various terrorist groups that we are looking at are offshoots and franchises of the same threat and are in Sinai, Libya, Yemen, Mali, and now in Afghanistan and elsewhere in Africa and Asia. None of us are safe until we have a path forward that addresses this interconnected reality. This is not a single country's problem. It is not a local or regional problem. It is our collective problem. On this front, Jordan has begun a collaborative effort to reach out to, as a Muslim and Arab state, to countries in Africa to help coordinate and support with stakeholders and build a partnership to address our interlinked threats. We are certain that there is no alternative to a comprehensive approach and close coordination among all stakeholders that considers the threat of various terrorist groups across the wider region. We hope this will align various programs, counterterrorism and security assistance efforts under a unified strategy. Finally, we cannot tackle this threat in a vacuum. A world that allows the Palestinian-Israeli conflict to move further away from the two-state solution is a world that fuels extremists' recruitment. Furthermore, the world should not be silent to violations to the sanctity of Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, as this will only empower those who seek to wage a religious war. Winning hearts and minds remains a big challenge, as this will also require, in the longer and medium term, dealing with governance, poverty, youth, job creation, and education. It is only by stabilizing the entire region, giving people hope instead of fear and destruction, that we will truly address these and other challenges, including the outpouring of refugees, many of whom are fleeing from terror and seeking a decent life far from their homes. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Majesty. I now give the floor to the Right Honourable Mr. David Cameron, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. David.
Mr. President, look, I agree with a lot of what's been said, and I won't repeat every point. You're right, this is a long-term campaign. You're right that ISIL have lost territory. We will play our part militarily. We've carried out 300 strikes in Iraq. We've trained over 1,000 Iraqi troops. We're going to play a particular role helping with the counter-IED part of what's happening in Iraq, and we'll play our part politically. We'll support Prime Minister Abadi with the vital work he's doing. Britain has spent $1.6 billion on supporting Syrians in those refugee camps and in Lebanon and in Jordan, and we'll go on doing that because it's so vital as part of this effort. And we'll support the transition in Syria that Barak, you spoke about and that we need to see so badly. We also will play our role in the propaganda war that we need to win because, frankly, we need to call out ISIL for the mass executions, for the rapes, for the killing of innocent Sunni Arabs while they're selling oil and wheat to the Assad regime at the same time. We need to win this propaganda war far more effectively than we have to date. We're going to be establishing the Coalition Strategy Communication Cell in the United Kingdom, which will give some funding of $15 million to start with. And I think it needs to be a very important part to win, as people have said, the battle of hearts and minds amongst young Muslims right around the world. But I want to make just one point in my remarks, and it's this, that I think what we're saying about countering violent extremism, I don't think it's enough. I think we need to focus on the extremism that lies behind the violent extremism as well. Why do I say this? Well, I say it because the boy who straps a bomb to his chest and blows up an Iraqi town, the guy that stands in the desert with a knife having just beheaded a British hostage, or whoever, they don't get there from a standing start. They have extremist views and an extremist mindset before they make that final decision to be an extremist terrorist. Now, maybe it starts with being told that Christians and Muslims can't live together. Maybe it moves on to being told the Muslims everywhere in the world are under attack, the grievance narrative. Sometimes it's being told that the terrible attack that took place in this city on 9/11 was somehow a Jewish conspiracy. And then it goes on to being told that violence is sometimes justified, that a suicide bomb, if it happens in Israel, well, maybe that's not so bad. And you get an extremist mindset that then moves on to the belief that taking part in violent jihad or joining ISIL or joining any of these other franchises, Al-Shabaab or others, is justified. And my point is simply this: we have to stop this process at the start, not at the end. So, of course, we have to win militarily, we have to have the political solution, we need all the propaganda I've spoken about, but we also need to challenge the extremist worldview right at the very start. What does that mean? Well, in Western countries, it means we have to root out the extremist preachers that are poisoning the minds of young Muslims in our country. We have to build more integrated societies so young people feel they truly belong. And we need to make sure we don't allow the incubation of an extremist worldview even before it gets to justifying violence. We've got to get it out of our schools, get it out of our prisons, get it out of our universities. I believe in freedom of speech, but freedom to hate is not the same thing. I think the King of Jordan, who just spoke, made a very powerful intervention about the special responsibility there is amongst Muslim countries and Muslim leaders. Barak, you said, and you're quite right, that every religion has its extremists. But we have to be frank that the biggest problem we have today is the Islamist extremist violence that has given birth to ISIL, to Al-Shabaab, to Al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, and so many other groups. Now, these people claim to act in the name of the Islamic religion. They don't. I can say they don't. I can say they don't over and over again. You can say they don't, but there's nothing more powerful than what, for instance, the King of Jordan has just said when Muslim leaders and Muslim countries reclaim their religion and explain why what these people are saying is not Islam, it is a perversion of Islam. So we have to do that and to take away the building blocks of extremism that lead people to an extremist worldview that then takes them to an extremist terrorist view. That, I think, is as important as the military, political, diplomatic, and other steps that we'll take as part of this vital, vital campaign.
Thank you, David. I want to now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Mark Rutte, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Barak. Esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On January 8th this year, I stood among thousands of people on Dam Square in Amsterdam. It was one day after the cowardly attack in Paris on the editorial staff of Charlie Hebdo. One day after the cold-blooded murder of 12 innocent people. People around the world were deeply affected by these events. Je suis Charlie, and we said it in Amsterdam too. It was an evening I'll never forget. There we stood, united and resolute. Men and women from all corners of the earth, young and old, people of every religious background. And our message to terrorists was loud and clear. We are different, and yet we are one. We are the majority. And we will not let you divide us. Hands off our freedom were my words that night. And I can still feel the emotion of that moment. Daesh and violent extremism are not other people's problems. Not only are countries like Syria and Iraq being completely destabilized, this threat also spreads insecurity and fuels tensions in our own communities. And that is why the Netherlands is and will remain so actively involved in the fight against Daesh and in combating violent extremism. We have an obligation to help foster international peace and stability, and we cannot take our own freedom for granted. So we stand shoulder to shoulder with many other countries in the region and beyond in the coalition against Daesh. Dutch F-16s are involved in the air campaign against Daesh targets on a daily basis. We have sent military trainers and equipment to Iraq to train the Iraqi army and the Peshmerga. We are also providing emergency aid, implementing counter-messaging strategies and working on capacity building. It is not an easy task, but it is crucial. When people are being beheaded and ancient heritage sites are being destroyed with sledgehammers, we must respond. And we must respond there where it is happening. A second track the Netherlands is following is prevention. In our own country, we have developed a broad program focusing not only on potential foreign terrorist fighters, but on parents, schools, local government and the local police too. If we can give young, often impressionable people the prospect of a good future, they will be less drawn to extremist groups. The idea is that intervening early in their immediate social environment is the best way to stop young people being tempted to go off to fight abroad. Any kind of positive and moderate influence can help. Our approach is inclusive where possible and repressive where necessary. Our international efforts include working with partners in the Global Counterterrorism Forum. The forum is a primary platform where countries can share knowledge and information in order to prevent terrorism. A few days ago, the Netherlands became co-chair of the forum, affirming our long-term commitment. The forum complements and collaborates with the UN and other organizations. Over the past year, there has been a big focus on how to prevent potential foreign terrorist fighters from traveling abroad and how to deal with those who come back. The fact is that violent extremism and terrorist groups like Daesh, Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra and Boko Haram are constantly evolving. This is not a static threat and will not simply disappear. The international community cannot afford to sit back. We must be vigilant and persistent. We must continue to make it clear that we are not fighting a religion. We are fighting terrorists who carry out attacks and whose barbarism knows no bounds. For that reason, too, it is good that we are meeting here today. The Netherlands remains fully committed to the task ahead. Freedom is our inspiration, resolve is our weapon, and together we will succeed in pushing back the terrorist threat. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to ask His Excellency Prime Minister Davutoglu for his statement.
Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I add my voice to the words of appreciation and thanks to President Obama for this much-timed initiative, especially when New York is the beating heart of the international public opinion. My country, has been the victim of terrorism since early 1970s, knows only too well that terrorism is an ugly instrument of illegitimate politics. Here only, we have been targeted by 3 terrorist organizations, groups with different extremist ideologies.